Henry Anderson left $12,000 on the dresser in his bedroom. It was not a mistake. It was not carelessness. He had not emptied his pockets after a long day and forgotten to put the money away. Every single bill on that dresser was exactly where he had placed it, deliberately, methodically, with the same cold precision he applied to every other decision in his life. It was a trap, a test, and he had been running it for 15 years. Secretaries, gardeners, cooks, housekeepers. Over a decade and a half, a parade of people had walked through the rooms of his mansion, and one by one, every single one of them had eventually found the money he left out and taken it. Some took it fast, the envelope gone within the first hour, the bills pocketed before he'd even gotten into position to watch. Others were more careful. They would wait a day, sometimes two, as if the extra time made it less of a theft and more of an accident. But in the end, it didn't matter how long they waited. They all took it. Every last one. And so Henry Anderson had built himself a belief. Solid and heavy and load-bearing, the way a wall is built from stone. Everyone has a price. No one is truly honest. It is only ever a matter of time. He was 38 years old. He was one of the most successful real estate businessmen in the city. He had built his fortune from almost nothing, through sharp instincts and relentless discipline and a willingness to work harder and longer than anyone around him. He had everything that a man in his position was supposed to want. And he had not fully trusted another human being in 15 years. It had started with Linda, his ex-wife. She had left him for a wealthier man, walked out of their life together without a backward glance, without the slightest visible conflict, as if she had simply been waiting for a better offer and it had finally arrived. After that, something closed inside Henry Anderson. Something hard and cold settled in his chest, the way frost settles into ground that has been left exposed too long, and it never fully thawed. He began testing people. Not consciously at first, but gradually it became a ritual, a system, something he did with the quiet compulsiveness of a man who cannot stop proving a theorem he already believes. He would leave cash somewhere visible and accessible inside his home, and then he would step back and watch. The money always disappeared. The belief was always confirmed. And with each confirmation, the wall inside him grew a little thicker, a little harder, a little more impossible to see over. Today was the turn of the new cleaning employee. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Miss Santos. This is Henry Anderson. You can start today." A brief pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. What is the address?" "Elmwood Drive, 14. 1 hour." He hung up. He went upstairs to his bedroom. He opened the top drawer of his dresser and took out a thick envelope. $12,000 in cash, counted and ready. He spread the bills loosely across the top of the dresser, the way a careless man might empty his pockets after a long day. A few hundreds here, some 50s there, the rest piled loosely in the middle, casual and unguarded and impossible to miss. He stepped back and looked at it. Then he walked behind the bedroom door, stood in the narrow shadow where he could not be seen, and waited. Janet Santos arrived 45 minutes later. She was 33 years old. She wore her work uniform, clean but faded from too many washes in too hot water. Her sneakers were so worn at the sole that she had folded a piece of cardboard inside the left one that morning to cover the hole. But she stood at the front door with her back straight and her chin level, a bag of cleaning supplies over one shoulder, her face calm and ready, the face of someone who has learned that how you carry yourself is the one thing that belongs entirely to you, regardless of everything else. Henry opened the door himself. "Miss Santos. I'm Henry Anderson. Please come in." "Good morning, sir." She stepped inside and looked around quietly. Not with greed. Not with envy. Not with the wide, calculating sweep of someone mentally pricing everything they see. She looked with the careful attention of someone who wants to understand a space before she touches it, the marble floors, the high ceilings, the wide staircase curving upward, everything expensive, everything perfect, everything silent. Henry walked her through the house quickly. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway bathrooms. His voice was flat and professional. "General cleaning 3 times a week. You'll begin on the upper floor. My bedroom needs particular attention." Janet moved through each room with the same focused attention, looking carefully at every surface, every corner, cataloging the work without being asked. "Understood, sir. I'll take care of everything." She paused, then added quietly, "You have a beautiful home." Henry said nothing. He simply turned and led her toward the staircase. A few minutes later, he was back behind the bedroom door. He heard her downstairs, the sound of her bag being set down, the clink of cleaning bottles, the soft squeak of her sneakers on the tile. Then he heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and steady, coming up. His arms were folded across his chest. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the narrow gap between the door and the frame, aimed directly at the dresser with its scattered pile of bills. $12,000. "Let's see, Miss Santos." The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They moved along the hallway. They stopped outside the bedroom door. There was a small pause, just 2 or 3 seconds, and then the door slowly swung open. Janet Santos stepped into the room. The bedroom was large and still and full of morning light. A king-sized bed with dark covers, heavy wooden furniture, everything neat, everything expensive, everything quiet. She took one step inside, then another. She set her bag down gently beside the door and reached in for her cleaning cloth. She straightened up, ready to begin. And then she saw it. The money on the dresser. She went completely still. The cleaning cloth hung loose in her hand. Her eyes moved slowly across the scattered bills, the hundreds, the 50s, the thick pile in the middle. And for a moment, she did not breathe. Behind the door, Henry Anderson did not breathe either. He leaned forward slightly, watching through the gap, his whole body tense. "Here it comes," he thought. "Here it always comes." Janet's hand tightened around the cleaning cloth. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at the money. Not moving toward it, not reaching for it, just looking. The way you might look at something that doesn't quite make sense, like finding an umbrella open in a room with no windows. Her lips moved slightly, as if she was counting without meaning to. Behind the door, Henry watched every second of it. He had seen this part before. This pause. This stillness. This moment before a person made their decision. He knew what came next. The quick glance toward the door. The small calculation behind the eyes. The hand moving forward. He waited. Janet took one step toward the dresser. Henry's jaw tightened. She took another step. And then the cleaning bottle slipped from under her arm. It hit the floor with a loud plastic clatter that broke the silence of the whole room. Janet flinched, bent down quickly, and picked it up. She stood back up straight, pressed it firmly under her arm this time, and looked at the dresser again. And then she did something Henry Anderson had never seen in 15 years. She put the cleaning cloth over her shoulder, set the bottle down carefully on the floor beside her feet, and began, with both hands, to organize the money. Not to take it. Not to hide it inside her uniform or push it quietly into her bag. She began to sort it. Her fingers moved carefully, almost gently, gathering the scattered bills together. She arranged them by denomination, the hundreds together, the 50s together, straightening each one, smoothing the corners, building one neat, tidy pile in the center of the dresser. She worked slowly and quietly, the way someone works when they are being careful with something that does not belong to them. Henry's arms dropped to his sides. His mouth opened slightly. When the bills were all gathered and straight and stacked, Janet reached into the front pocket of her uniform and took out a small notepad and a pen. She wrote something on the top page, tore it out neatly, and folded it once. Then she placed it on top of the money pile, pressing it flat with 2 fingers so it wouldn't slide. She stepped back. She looked at the dresser one more time, the way a person looks at a finished piece of work. And then, very quietly, barely loud enough to be heard across the room, she whispered something. Henry leaned forward. He strained to hear. "Thank you, Lord, for an honest job." Then she picked up her cleaning bottle, unfolded her cloth, and got to work. She moved through the bedroom the way she moved through every room she had ever cleaned, with focus, with care, with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with being watched. She dusted the furniture in long, even strokes. She wiped the mirror above the dresser without once glancing at the money sitting directly below her hands. She swept the floor from corner to corner, moving furniture gently, putting it back exactly where she had found it. Henry did not move from behind the door. Not when she finished dusting. Not when she straightened the pillows on the bed with the same gentle attention she had given everything else. He stood there long after she had moved out of the bedroom and down the hallway, her footsteps fading, the sound of her cleaning carrying on into the next room. He stood there and stared at the dresser, at the neat, organized pile of bills, at the small folded note sitting on top. Finally, he walked across the room and picked it up. He unfolded it. In clean, careful handwriting it said, $12,000 found on the bedroom dresser. All bills accounted for and organized. Janet Santos. Henry read it once. Then he read it again. He set it back down on top of the money. For a long moment he just stood there. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the city moved the way it always did, cars and voices and the distant sound of the world going about its business. But inside this bedroom, inside Henry Anderson's chest, something was happening that he could not quite name. When Janet came downstairs an hour later, her bag over her shoulder and her work done, she found him sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up. All finished, sir. The upper floor, east wing. I left a note in the bedroom about some cash I found on the dresser. I wanted it documented, just to be safe. I saw it, Henry said. Good. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. Same days next week? Henry looked at her for a moment. This woman with her worn sneakers and her cardboard insole and her small, tidy handwriting. This woman who had just been alone in a room with $12,000 and had walked out without a single bill in her pocket. Yes, he said. Same days. She nodded once more and let herself out. Henry listened to the sound of the front door closing softly behind her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note. He set it on the glass table in front of him and smoothed it flat with his palm. $12,000 found on the bedroom dresser. All bills accounted for and organized. Janet Santos. He had been running his test for 15 years. For the first time in 15 years, he did not know what to do with the result. The second test happened 3 weeks later. Henry placed $8,000 in the kitchen, not scattered this time, but sitting neatly inside an open envelope on the counter, right next to the dish soap and the sponge. The kind of place a person's hand naturally goes when they are cleaning a kitchen. The kind of place where it would be very easy to say, I didn't even see it. He watched from the hallway through a small gap in the door. Janet came into the kitchen, set her bag down, and began working from left to right the way she always did, wiping the counters in long, even strokes, moving each item, cleaning underneath it, setting it back exactly where it was. When she reached the envelope, she stopped. She picked it up with 2 fingers, looked inside, and set it back down. Then she finished wiping that section of the counter, moved the envelope slightly so she could clean beneath it, and placed it back in its original position. Before she left the kitchen, she took out her notepad. Henry found the note on top of the envelope when he came in after she left. $8,000 in white envelope found on kitchen counter. Moved briefly to clean surface beneath. Returned to original position. Janet Santos. He stood in his kitchen and read it and felt that same strange sensation from before, that quiet, uncomfortable thing sitting just below his ribs that he still could not name. He put the note in his jacket pocket. He did not throw it away. The third test, he placed $5,000 in the laundry room, tucked behind a bottle of fabric softener. The fourth, he left $15,000 on the bathroom counter in a clear plastic bag. The fifth, he scattered bills across the floor of his study as if they had simply fallen there, and left the room door wide open. Each time, Janet found the money. Each time, she left it exactly as she found it, or better. Each time, there was a note. Neat handwriting. Full amount. Her full name. Henry kept every single one of them. He told himself it was evidence. That he was simply documenting the results of his experiment the way a careful man documents anything important. But the notes began to pile up in the top drawer of his desk. And sometimes, late at night, he would open that drawer and look at them without quite understanding why he felt the need to. $15,000 in plastic bag. Bathroom counter. Untouched. Janet Santos. $5,000 found scattered on study floor, gathered and placed on desk. Janet Santos. The handwriting was always the same, calm and clear and unhurried, like the woman herself. By the end of the first year, Henry had run the test 11 times. Janet had passed all 11. By the end of the second year, he had stopped counting. He still left money out sometimes. Old habit, old instinct, but he had quietly stopped expecting a different result. What he found himself doing instead, without fully realizing it at first, was watching her work. Not to catch her. Just watching. The way she handled the fragile things. The old ceramic lamp in the upstairs hallway that had a hairline crack along the base. She always lifted it with both hands, the way you carry something you know has already been hurt once. The framed photographs on the study wall. She dusted each frame separately, carefully, as if the people in the pictures deserved the same respect as the man who owned the house. She never moved anything without putting it back. She never rushed. She never did less in a room just because he wasn't there to see it. In fact, Henry realized slowly, she worked exactly the same whether he was home or not. He had checked. He had the camera footage. He had watched it more than once. The Janet Santos on the security camera was identical to the Janet Santos he could see with his own eyes. Same pace, same care, same quiet attention to every corner and surface and edge. It unsettled him in a way he could not explain. He was a man who believed that people only performed when someone was watching. That goodness was mostly theater. That character, at its core, was just reputation management. But Janet Santos behaved as if she were being watched by something no camera could record. It made him feel, and he would not have used this word out loud, not even to himself, it made him feel ashamed. Just slightly. Just around the edges. Like a man who has been standing in a beautiful garden for years and only just now noticed the flowers. It was in the third year that he noticed the Tuesdays and Thursdays. He was in his home office, a habit he had fallen into, working from home more often on the days Janet came, though he told himself this had nothing to do with her, when he heard the front door close a full hour before her shift was supposed to end. He looked up from his laptop. He checked the time. He pulled up the camera feed on the small monitor on his desk. The hallway was empty. Her bag was gone. He frowned. He pulled up the logs for the past month and scrolled through them. Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, she had left an hour early. Thursday last week, same thing. The week before that, the same pattern. Every Tuesday. Every Thursday. She slipped out quietly, saying nothing to anyone. Always a little before her work was done. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. So he thought, here it is. 15 years of watching people, and he knew what a secret looked like. He knew the particular shape of someone hiding something. And suddenly the image he had built of Janet Santos, steady, honest, impossibly uncomplicated, began to develop a shadow at its edges. Maybe she was not what she seemed. Maybe she had simply been very, very patient. He told himself he was not disappointed. He told himself this was exactly what he had always known would happen. The only surprise was that it had taken this long. But the next Tuesday, when he heard her footsteps move toward the front door an hour before her shift ended, he was already standing up, already reaching for his car keys, already telling himself he was simply being thorough. He followed her. The city was busy at that hour. Late afternoon traffic moving in slow, irritated streams. People on the sidewalks walking fast with their eyes down. Henry sat 2 cars behind the bus she had boarded, feeling faintly ridiculous in his dark sedan and his tailored jacket, following a cleaning woman through the city like a private detective in a film. But he did not turn back. The bus wound through neighborhoods he did not usually visit. Smaller streets, older buildings, the kind of part of the city that worked hard and asked for nothing in return. Janet sat near the window. From 2 cars back, he could see her profile when the traffic slowed. Her face turned outward, not dreaming, exactly, but resting. The face of someone who saves her energy carefully because she knows she is going to need it. 20 minutes later, she got off. Henry parked badly, one wheel on the curb, and followed on foot. She walked quickly here, more quickly than she moved in his house, with purpose, with direction, like a woman who knows exactly where she is going and cannot get there fast enough. She turned a corner. Henry turned it after her. And then he stopped. Because in front of him, taking up most of the block with its wide flat face and its sliding glass doors and the small brown sign above the entrance, was a building he recognized immediately. City General Hospital. He watched Janet push through the sliding doors and disappear inside. Henry stood on the pavement outside and did not move for a moment. A man bumped his shoulder walking past. A taxi honked somewhere behind him. The city kept going, indifferent and loud all around him. Then he walked through the sliding doors and followed her in. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals smell, sharp and clean and somehow sad at the same time. The lobby was busy with people moving in every direction. Henry caught a glimpse of Janet's faded uniform disappearing around a corner to the left and followed at a distance. She moved through the hospital with the ease of someone who knew every turn. Past the pharmacy, past the second nurse's station, through a set of double doors that opened onto a longer corridor with pale yellow walls and a quieter kind of hush. Henry stopped at the double doors and looked through the small window at the center. Above the corridor entrance, in simple dark letters, a sign read, Pediatric Oncology Ward. Janet was already halfway down the corridor. She stopped outside a door, room 14, and did something Henry had not seen her do before. She paused. Just for a moment. One hand on the door handle, her head dropped slightly, her eyes closed, as if she were taking a breath. As if she were arranging her face into something softer, something stronger, something that would not frighten the person on the other side of the door. Then she pushed it open and went inside. Henry moved slowly down the corridor and stopped outside room 14. The door was not fully closed. Through the gap, he could see a slice of the room, a window with thin curtains letting in pale afternoon light, the edge of a hospital bed, medical equipment blinking quietly in the corner. And a small boy. He was about 7 years old. He was lying against the pillows with his eyes half open, his face pale and thin in the way that takes your breath away, the kind of thin that isn't about missing meals, but about something harder, something happening on the inside. His head was smooth and bare. He had no hair. Janet was already at his side. She had pulled a chair close to the bed and was sitting in it, leaning forward, holding both of the boy's small hands in hers. She was talking to him in a low, soft voice. Not the professional quiet she used in Henry's house, but something different. Something warmer and older and more tired. Henry could not hear the words. But then the boy turned his head slightly and said something back, and Janet laughed. A small, real laugh, the kind that cost something, and she reached up and touched his cheek with the back of her fingers, and she said, loud enough for Henry to hear through the gap in the door, "Mama's here, baby. Mama's here." Henry took one step back from the door. His hand found the wall beside him. A nurse appeared from somewhere down the corridor and pushed past him gently with a polite, distracted smile, the kind nurses give to visitors standing in hallways looking lost. She knocked twice on the door of room 14 and stepped inside. Through the gap, Henry heard her voice, gentle and professional. "Mrs. Santos, I'm sorry to bring this up tonight, but we still need to finalize the payment arrangement for Gabriel's next chemotherapy cycle. The billing office has been trying to reach you." The pause. Then Janet's voice, steady and quiet. "I know. I'll come and speak to them before I leave." The nurse came back out and moved down the corridor. Henry did not move. He stood against the wall outside room 14 with his hand pressed to the plaster and looked at the ceiling and felt something cracking open in his chest. Something he had sealed shut a very long time ago and told himself was better that way. The boy's name was Gabriel. He was Janet's son. And he was sick. Henry did not know how long he stood there. Long enough for the light coming through the window at the end of the corridor to shift from pale yellow to the gray-orange of early evening. Long enough for two different nurses to pass him with the same polite, distracted smiles. Long enough for the sounds of the ward to settle into a kind of rhythm around him. Soft footsteps, quiet voices, the occasional beep of a machine somewhere behind a closed door. He was a man who made decisions quickly. It was one of the things that had made him rich. In a meeting, in a negotiation, in any room where other people were still thinking, Henry Anderson had already decided. He did not hesitate. He did not second-guess. He moved, and then he moved again, and he did not look back. But he stood in that hospital corridor and could not make himself leave. He was still there when the door to room 14 opened and Janet stepped out. She saw him immediately. And the thing that crossed her face was not guilt. It was not the look of someone caught in a lie or someone scrambling to explain themselves. It was something quieter and more painful than that. It was fear, but not the fear of a person who has done something wrong. It was the fear of a person who has been working very hard to hold something together, and who has just seen something that might make it fall apart. Her eyes went from his face to the corridor around them, and back to his face. "Mr. Anderson." Her voice was steady. "Barely." Henry opened his mouth. Then he closed it again. This was unusual for him. Henry Anderson always had words ready. But standing in the pale yellow corridor outside his cleaning employee's sick child's hospital room, he found that all his usual words were the wrong shape for the moment. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. It was such an obviously untrue thing to say that for a brief second, something almost like a smile passed across Janet's face. Then it was gone. "I see," she said. They stood there looking at each other for a moment. The millionaire in his tailored jacket and the cleaning woman in her faded uniform. Both of them slightly unsure of what came next. "Can we talk?" Henry said. There was a small cafe 2 blocks from the hospital. The kind of place with plastic chairs and laminated menus and a woman behind the counter who called everyone sweetheart without looking up. Henry felt extremely out of place inside it. He sat across the small table from Janet and folded his hands on the surface and said nothing while she wrapped both hands around a cup of tea she hadn't touched yet. Outside the window, the city was switching from day to night, streetlights flickering on, the traffic thinning, the sky going the deep blue that comes just before full dark. "How long?" Henry said. Janet looked at the tea. "Gabriel was diagnosed 8 months ago," she said. "Leukemia." She said the word flatly. The way you say a word you have had to practice saying so many times it has lost its power to shock you. "He's 7. He turns 7 in February. He was in the middle of a birthday song when he fainted." Henry said nothing. "My husband Robert died 3 years ago. Construction accident. A scaffold gave way on the 14th floor." She paused. "There were 2 other men. They all—" She stopped. She picked up the tea, held it without drinking, set it back down. "Gabriel is all I have." "The treatment?" Henry said carefully. "Chemotherapy. Insurance covers some of it." She looked at the table. "Not enough." "How much is the gap?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she named a number. Henry kept his face still. It was not an impossible number for him. He had spent more than that on the glass table in his kitchen without a second thought. But sitting across from this woman, he understood that for her, it was not a number at all. It was a wall. A wall she had been throwing herself against every single day for 8 months, with no door and no ladder and no one waiting on the other side to pull her over. "I've been picking up extra shifts through the agency," she said. "Evening work, weekends. I sold my husband's watch. His tools. The pause. His ring in February. Gabriel hasn't mentioned it." Henry looked at his hands on the table. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up then, and there was something in her eyes that was not anger exactly, but something close to it, something firm and dignified and slightly tired. "Tell you what, Mr. Anderson? That my son is sick? That I need help?" She shook her head slowly. "I come to your house to clean it. That is what you pay me for. My life is not part of the arrangement. You could have asked for an advance. More hours." "I don't ask for mercy," she said quietly. "Not from employers. Not from anyone." She looked back at the tea. "My mother raised me to stand on my own 2 feet. I know what I look like to people. When they find out, they look at me differently. They start to pity me. And pity is a heavy thing to carry on top of everything else." She paused. "If I start asking for mercy, I may forget how to stand." The cafe was warm and slightly noisy around them. The clatter of cups, the low television in the corner, the sweetheart from behind the counter. Henry sat very still inside all of it. He had spent 15 years building a belief out of disappointment. He had collected evidence the way other men collected trophies. Every stolen bill, every broken trust, every person who had looked him in the eye and taken what wasn't theirs. He had stacked them all up and called it wisdom. But sitting across from Janet Santos in a plastic chair in a small cafe near City General Hospital, he could feel the whole careful structure of that belief beginning to shake. Because here was a woman who had been alone in a room with $12,000, then 8, then 15, over and over again for 3 years, in the middle of a crisis that would have made most people feel completely justified in taking anything they could reach. And she had not taken a cent. Not one. She had written notes instead. Neat, careful sign notes. As if honesty were not a choice she was making under pressure, but simply the way she was built. Henry thought about the notes in his desk drawer. He had never thrown a single one away. He thought about Gabriel, 7 years old with no hair, holding his mother's hands in the pale light of room 14. He thought about Janet's face in the corridor, that specific fear. Not of being caught. Of losing the one thing keeping her upright. I may forget how to stand. He cleared his throat. I'd like to help with Gabriel's treatment, he said. The full cost. Whatever insurance doesn't cover. Janet's hands tightened around the cup. Mr. Anderson. I'm not asking permission, he said. Then, hearing how that sounded, he softened his voice slightly, which was not something he did often or easily. I mean, I'm not offering out of pity. I want to make that clear. I'm not sitting here feeling sorry for you. She watched him carefully. Then why? Henry was quiet for a moment. Because I can, he said finally. And because, he stopped. He looked at the table. Because it's the right thing to do. He had not said those words in a very long time. They felt strange in his mouth, a little stiff, like a joint that hadn't been used in years. But they were true. And some part of him recognized the feeling of a true thing, even after all this time. Janet looked at him for a long moment. Her face was very hard to read. There was the dignity she always carried, which did not bend easily. There was the exhaustion she tried to hide, which was always there behind her eyes if you knew how to look. And there was something else now, something careful and uncertain. The look of a person standing at a door they are not sure whether to trust. I would pay you back, she said quietly. Every dollar. That is not necessary. It is to me, she said. And the way she said it told him there was no point arguing. He nodded. All right. They sat for another minute without speaking. Outside, a bus went past, its headlights sweeping briefly across the cafe window. Janet picked up her tea and finally took a sip. She held the cup in both hands and looked out at the dark street. Henry looked at her profile, tired and steady and somehow still strong, like a tree that is bent in every storm and is still standing. He likes dinosaurs, she said suddenly, quietly, almost to herself. Henry blinked. Sorry. Gabriel. A small pause. He likes dinosaurs. He has a picture book. Well, he had one. I had to sell most of his books when... She stopped. She pressed her lips together for a moment. He still talks about the dinosaurs. Henry said nothing, but something in his chest moved. He did not attach his name to the payment. He called his financial advisor that same evening from the car, while the city lights slid past the windows. He arranged for a donation to be made to City General Hospital directly, marked for Gabriel Santos in pediatric oncology, covering the complete remaining cost of treatment. Not the standard plan, the best one the hospital offered. The one the billing office had mentioned but Janet couldn't afford. The one with the better medication and the specialist consultations and the additional support hours. His financial advisor asked if he wanted a receipt for tax purposes. No, Henry said. Should I include a note? A name? No. He paused. Anonymous. He hung up. He sat in the car for a moment outside his mansion. Through the gate, he could see the lights of the house, all those rooms, all that marble, all that expensive quiet. A monument to everything he had built. And no one to share it with. He had always told himself he preferred it that way. He was beginning to wonder if that was actually true. Or if it was simply something he had told himself so many times, it had started to feel like a fact. He got out of the car and went inside. He did not sleep well that night. 3 days passed, then 4. Henry went about his work the way he always did. Meetings, calls, site visits, contracts. He sat at the head of conference tables and made decisions worth millions of dollars and did not show on his face that any part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. But it was. He found himself checking the time on Tuesday afternoons. He found himself thinking about a 7-year-old boy with a dinosaur book that had been sold to cover medical bills. He found himself opening his desk drawer late at night and looking at the stack of notes without quite knowing what he was looking for. $8,000 in white envelope found on kitchen counter. Janet Santos. $15,000 in plastic bag. Bathroom counter. Untouched. Janet Santos. He closed the drawer. He told himself the donation had been the right thing and the matter was settled, and that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. On the 6th day, his phone rang. It was Janet. She never called him. In 3 years, the communication between them had been almost entirely one-directional, schedules and notes and the occasional brief exchange at the end of a shift. She did not have the kind of relationship with him that involved phone calls. He picked up on the second ring. Miss Santos. When she spoke, her voice was different from the one she used in his house, still steady, but with something beneath the steadiness, something working hard to stay in place. Mr. Anderson. I'm sorry to call you directly. I got your number from the agency. The pause. The hospital called me this morning. They told me that Gabriel's full treatment has been covered by an anonymous donor. She stopped. He could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, the breathing of someone who has learned to control themselves under pressure. Mr. Anderson. Was it you? Henry looked at the wall of his office. Why would you think it was me? He said. Because, she said quietly, you are the only person in my life who could. The office was very silent. Outside the window, 30 floors below, the city moved and buzzed and went about its enormous, indifferent business. Yes, Henry said. It was me. The silence on the other end of the line was different from his silence. His silence was controlled. Hers was full, the way a room is full when it contains something too large to speak around quickly. When she finally spoke, her voice was not what he expected. There were no tears, no stumbling words. She sounded like herself, but quieter. Like herself with something heavy lifted off one shoulder. I want to come and speak to you in person, she said. If that's all right. That is not necessary. It is to me, she said. He recognized those words. He had heard them 3 days ago in a small cafe near the hospital. All right, he said. Tomorrow. After your shift. She came to find him in his study. He was behind his desk when she knocked, just her knuckles on the open door, 2 quiet taps. She still had her uniform on. She had come straight from cleaning. Come in. She stepped inside and stood in front of his desk. She did not sit down. She held her hands loosely at her sides and looked at him with an expression that was very difficult to receive, not gratitude exactly, though there was gratitude in it. Something deeper. Something more serious. I've been thinking about what to say to you since yesterday morning, she said. Since the hospital called. Henry leaned back slightly in his chair and waited. I was angry at first, she said. He raised an eyebrow. That was not what he expected. Angry? Yes. She said it simply, without apology. Because I had not asked for it. Because you did it without telling me. Because, she paused, choosing her words carefully, the way she moved furniture carefully, putting each one exactly where she meant it to go. Because I have been fighting very hard to handle this myself. And for a moment, when I heard, I felt like that fight had been taken away from me. Henry said nothing. But then I sat with it longer, she continued. And I understood something. She looked at him directly. You didn't do it to take anything from me. You did it because you saw my son and you could help and you chose to. That is different. Yes, Henry said. That is what I intended. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Anderson, I have worked in many houses. For many people. Some of them were kind. Some of them were not. But most of them, she stopped. Most of them never saw me. Not really. I was the person who cleaned the things. I was the uniform and the worn-out shoes. She looked at the desk, then back up at him. You watched me for 3 years. I knew that. I am not as invisible as people think. Henry felt something shift in his chest. "I never tried to hide it," he said. Though as he said it, he realized that was not entirely true. "I know what you were doing," she said. He went still. "The money," she said. "On the dresser. In the kitchen. The bathroom. The study floor." She held his gaze steadily. "It was not carelessness, Mr. Anderson. You are not a careless man." The study was very quiet. Henry had been waiting for this moment without knowing it, the moment when the thing he had been doing in secret was finally named out loud. And now that it had arrived, he found he could not perform any of the reactions he might have prepared. He could not be dismissive or cold or logical. He simply sat behind his desk and let the truth of it sit in the room between them. "No," he said. "It wasn't." "You were testing me," she said. "Not as an accusation. More like a person identifying something on a map. This is where we are." "Yes." "And everyone before me, they failed." "Yes." She nodded slowly, not surprised, not wounded. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they already understood but needed confirmed. "How much did you leave out?" she said. "Over 3 years total." Henry thought about it. "Just over $90,000, he said. "Across the different tests." Something moved across her face. Not shock exactly. More like the particular tiredness of someone who has just learned how close they were standing to an edge they didn't know existed. $90,000, she repeated softly. "Yes." She looked at the window for a moment, at the city spread out behind the glass, glittering and enormous and completely unaware of the two people standing in this room having this conversation. Then she looked back at him. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "I would never have stolen from you. Not even to save my son." She said it the way she wrote her notes, plainly, without decoration, as if it were simply a fact about herself. The same as her name or her age. Something fixed and true that required no argument. Henry looked at her. And something happened in that moment that he could not fully explain, even to himself. Something shifted in the foundation of a belief he had spent 15 years building and reinforcing and defending. Not dramatically. There was no crash, no collapse. It was more like a stone being removed from a wall. One stone, but a load-bearing one. Everyone has a price, he had told himself over and over for 15 years. But sitting here, looking at this woman who had sorted his money and written him notes and carried her son through chemotherapy alone and never once asked for more than she had earned, he understood with a quiet and devastating certainty that he had been wrong. Not about everyone. About her. And if he was wrong about her, then the wall had a crack in it. And if the wall had a crack in it, he did not finish the thought. "I know," he said instead. It was only 2 words. But the way he said them was different from the way Henry Anderson usually said anything. There was no strategy in it. No careful positioning. Just 2 words said plainly by a man who meant them. Janet looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached into the front pocket of her uniform, the same pocket where she always kept her notepad, and took out a small folded piece of paper. She leaned forward and set it on his desk in front of him. "I wanted to give you this in person," she said. Henry picked it up and unfolded it. It was a receipt from City General Hospital, with the full amount of Gabriel's treatment listed. And at the bottom, in the space for donor reference, the word, "Anonymous." Below the receipt, in Janet's handwriting, she had written, "I will pay back every dollar. It may take time. But I want you to know that I am keeping count. Janet Santos." Henry stared at it. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said. "But I need to. Do you understand the difference?" He looked up at her. And he did understand, because he had spent his whole life doing things he didn't have to do but needed to. Building, testing, proving, protecting. He understood the particular stubbornness of a person who needs to do a thing for their own reasons, regardless of whether anyone else sees the point. "Yes," he said. "I understand." She gave him one small nod. "Then I'll see you Thursday." She picked up her bag from the floor by the door, settled it over her shoulder, and walked out of his study. Henry sat behind his desk for a long time after her footsteps had faded down the hallway. He was still holding the receipt. Gabriel responded to the new treatment plan almost immediately. The specialist, a quiet woman named Dr. Reeves, who spoke with the unhurried confidence of someone who has given both good news and bad news and knows the weight of each, told Janet at the end of the 3rd week that the numbers were moving in the right direction. The boy was fighting. The medicine was helping. There was real reason to hope. Henry heard this piece of news secondhand. He had not expected to hear it at all. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Janet had come downstairs after finishing the East Wing and stopped in the kitchen doorway where he happened to be standing with a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. "I heard from Dr. Reeves this week," she said. He looked up. "Gabriel's numbers are improving." Henry put the cup down. "That's good news?" he said. "Yes." She said it quietly, looking at the kitchen counter, and there was something in the way she said it. Something held very carefully, the way you hold something fragile that you are afraid to believe in too much in case it breaks, that made Henry look away and find something else to do with his eyes for a moment. "I'm glad," he said. And he was. Which surprised him a little. Not the gladness itself, but the depth of it. He was glad the way you are glad about something that matters to you, not the polite gladness of a man hearing good news about a stranger. Something more than that. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the kitchen window. "Does he still like dinosaurs?" he said. There was a pause. When he glanced back, Janet was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not quite surprised. Something softer than that. "Yes," she said. "He does." Henry nodded. He looked back out the window. "Good," he said. He did not explain why he had asked. But that evening, after Janet had gone, he sat at his computer for 20 minutes and found a large, beautifully illustrated encyclopedia of prehistoric dinosaurs. Full color. Hardcover. The kind of book that was almost too heavy for a 7-year-old to hold. He ordered it without overthinking. He had it shipped to City General Hospital, attention Gabriel Santos, room 14. With no note inside. He closed the laptop and went back to his work. But he sat a little differently in his chair for the rest of the evening. The book arrived on a Saturday. Henry knew this because Janet told him on the following Thursday. She came into the kitchen while he was standing at the counter, and she set her cleaning bag down by the door and said, without any preamble, "Gabriel received a book in the hospital this week. A dinosaur encyclopedia. Hardcover. No note inside." Henry looked at his coffee. "Did he?" "He did. He made the nurses read it to him 3 times in one day. Dr. Reeves said she now knows more about the Cretaceous period than she ever expected to." Henry said nothing. But something happened at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile and was not quite not a smile either. "It was a very kind thing," Janet said simply. "Whoever sent it." She picked up her bag and went upstairs to begin her work. Henry stood in the kitchen and looked out at the garden. The perfectly trimmed garden that nobody ever sat in, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Something warm. He did not immediately know what to do with it. 6 weeks later, Gabriel came home. Not home to the house Janet had before. That house was gone, given up for a smaller apartment closer to the hospital when the bills began mounting. But home to her apartment. To his room with the narrow bed and the second-hand curtains and the small shelf where the dinosaur encyclopedia now sat in the place of honor, too big and too beautiful for the shelf, but there nonetheless. Henry did not know any of this directly. He knew it because on a Tuesday when Janet did not leave early for the first time in many months, he noticed from his home office that she was still there at her usual finishing time. He went downstairs. "You're still here," he said. She looked up from the baseboard she was wiping. "Gabriel came home yesterday. I didn't need to leave early." Henry stood in the doorway of the room. "How is he?" "Tired," she said. "But home." She straightened up, pressed one hand briefly to the small of her back. "Dr. Reeves says the next few months will tell us more. But he is home. And he is eating. And this morning he told me that the Brachiosaurus was unfairly underrated." She paused. "I'm not sure where he learned the word underrated." "The book, probably," Henry said. She looked at him. He looked at the wall. "Probably," she agreed and went back to work. Henry changed things slowly. He was not a man who changed things all at once. That was not how he was built. He changed things the way he had built his fortune. one careful decision at a time, each one resting on the last. He started with the employment policies. He called his household manager into his office one morning and told him that going forward, all domestic staff employed at the mansion would receive full healthcare coverage. Not the minimal plan the agency offered, comprehensive coverage. Dental, vision, mental health support. All staff, his manager said. All staff, past and current. The pause. Also, I want a review of all compensation packages. If anyone is being paid below a living wage, I want that corrected. Not gradually. Immediately. Then, stop calling me sir. His manager looked up. What would you prefer? Henry considered. Henry, he said. I think Henry will do. It was a small thing. But small things, Henry was learning, were sometimes the ones that mattered most. He stopped hiding. Not all at once, that too was gradual. But he stopped positioning himself behind doors and around corners. He stopped leaving money out in obvious places to see what would happen. He still had the cameras. Old habits left their infrastructure behind even when the habit itself was gone. But he stopped watching the footage the way a detective watches evidence. One afternoon, he caught himself about to open his desk drawer, the one with the notes, and stopped with his hand on the handle. Then he opened it anyway. The notes were still there. A thick stack of them. 3 years' worth, each one in Janet's clean and careful handwriting. He picked them up and looked at the first one. $12,000 found on the bedroom dresser. All bills accounted for and organized. Janet Santos. He sat with them for a long moment. Then he put them back in the drawer. He did not throw them away. He thought perhaps he never would. Not because they were evidence of anything anymore, but because they were a record of the moment things had begun to change. Of the first crack in a wall he had spent 15 years building. Some records deserve to be kept. Gabriel visited the mansion once. It was Janet's idea, suggested so carefully and with so much quiet hesitation. He's been asking about where I work, and I thought, if it wouldn't be an inconvenience, perhaps just once, that Henry had said yes before she finished the sentence, which surprised them both. He came on a Saturday morning. Janet brought him in through the front door, holding his hand. Gabriel stood in the entrance hall and looked up at the high ceiling and the wide staircase and the marble floors and said, very seriously, "It looks like a museum." Janet closed her eyes briefly. But Henry laughed. It was a real laugh. Not polished, not social, not the kind he produced in meetings when someone said something that was meant to be amusing. A real one. Short and genuine and slightly rusty from lack of use. Gabriel looked at him with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend he isn't curious. "Are you the man who owns the dinosaur book?" he said. Henry looked at Janet. Janet looked at the ceiling. "I might be," Henry said. Gabriel considered this seriously. "The Brachiosaurus section is the best part," he said. "But the illustrator got the neck angle wrong on page 47. I can show you if you want." Henry looked down at this small, pale, thin boy in his oversized sweater, who had no hair and very large eyes and the particular confidence of someone who knows a great deal about a subject they care about. "I would like that," Henry said. They spent 45 minutes on the floor of Henry's study, Gabriel cross-legged with the encyclopedia open in his lap, Henry in the armchair pulled close, Janet sitting on the small sofa pretending to read something on her phone but not really reading anything at all, while Gabriel walked Henry through every error in the illustration of the Brachiosaurus with the grave authority of a junior professor. Henry listened to every word. When they left, Gabriel stopped at the front door and turned around. "Thank you for the book," he said. "Then, and for my treatment." He said it simply, without embarrassment, the way children say true things, because they have not yet learned to be indirect about them. "Mama told me someone helped pay for my medicine. I figured it was you." Henry stood in his doorway and looked at this boy. "You're welcome, Gabriel," he said. Gabriel nodded, satisfied. He took his mother's hand and walked down the driveway. Henry stood at the door and watched them go, Janet with her straight back in her worn sneakers and her son's hand in hers, both of them small against the long driveway and the iron gate and the wide city beyond. He stood there until they were gone. Then he stood there a little longer. Sometimes it only takes one person to crack a wall you thought was permanent. One person who, in the middle of their own worst year, chooses honesty not because it was easy, but because it was simply who they were. Henry Anderson had spent 15 years collecting proof that no one could be trusted. It took Janet Santos 3 years of quiet, steady, unremarkable integrity to prove him wrong. She never asked to change him. She never tried. She just showed up. She did her work. She left her notes. And she never took what wasn't hers. That was enough. If you've ever been in a dark place and chosen to do the right thing anyway, when no one was watching, when it would have been so easy not to, this story is about you. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from today?